The British river pollution scandal is all over the news. Water companies are destroying UK rivers by dumping disgusting amounts of raw sewage in them, but no one's talking about the politicians facilitating and profiting from it. To top it off, the government have just passed a bill allowing water companies to dump raw sewage in UK rivers for the next 15 years. In this video, we look at how our rivers got in such a dangerous state, the UK politicians profiting from this disaster, and the dirty money trail from water companies to these politicians that led to water price hikes for consumers, polluted rivers, and billions of pounds being siphoned out of the country. Let's start with the dangerous decline of our rivers. Every single river in England has failed pollution tests, and only 14% of them meet a good ecological standard according to government stats. In Northern Ireland, only 33% meet a good ecological standard compared to 40% in Wales and 66% in Scotland. Raw sewage was discharged into UK rivers a total of 400,000 times for a total of 3.1 million hours in 2020 and 375,000 times for a total of 2.7 million hours in 2021. Investigations have shown that on top of all this raw sewage discharge, water companies are discharging it illegally at times they shouldn't, for example during dry spells. This pollution's killing off our shellfish and bringing serious health consequences to the general public. And most importantly, summer's coming and I'd rather not be swimming alongside an army of turds. But how did we get here? Back in 1989, Conservative ministers sold England's state-owned water authorities off to the private sector, under the premise that private sector cash was required to upgrade old UK sewage systems. The taxpayer paid for £5 billion worth of debt to be wiped before they were sold to investors for only 22% of their market value. What a steal! And that was when the raw sewage dumps started happening. Wales and Scotland still have state-owned water authorities but suffer the consequences of England's privatisation. 71%, that's nearly 3/4 of the shares in England's 9 privatised water companies, are owned by organisations from overseas, by hedge funds, banks, foreign governments and businesses based in tax havens. Here are some of the notable owners of our 9 private water companies. Malaysian company Corporation Berhad owns all of Wessex Water. Chung Kong Group, an offshore company belonging to Hong Kong's richest person, owns 80% of Northumbrian Water. US hedge funds BlackRock, Lazard and Vanguard all have a stake in Severn Trent, United Utilities and South West Water. JP Morgan Asset Management owns 40% of Southern Water. And the list of foreign investment funds and private equity companies goes on. These profit-hungry companies made a post-tax profit of £18.86 billion from 2006 to 2017, paying out £18.83 billion in dividends, showing their priority is paying dividends rather than reinvesting in infrastructure. These huge dividend payouts cost the average household an extra £100 a year. And does that extra cost ensure proper pollution treatment and the conservation of the environment? Yeah, right. Now here's where it gets crazy. This is Water UK, a lobbying company owned and paid for by the water companies. Members, aka these private sewage companies, pay Water UK a yearly fee for membership. Water UK then regularly lobbies government ministers for favourable laws, i.e. laws that will increase their profit margin, like allowing them to dump untreated sewage into our rivers and waterways. The board of Water UK is comprised of 15 members, one from each of our 9 main water companies in England, as well as a few other water companies, Portsmouth, Wales, Scotland, and 2 other Water UK members. And its paying members include our top 9 private water companies and a splatter more. Here are a bunch of Conservative MPs at a Water UK reception. There were dozens of comments on this Twitter post calling for them to stop polluting UK rivers, but that's far from what's happening. Now if you look at Water UK's website, it's not immediately clear that they're a lobbying company. In fact, they do a very good job at hiding the fact. It looks like they're a general information service. But I found a job description they released in 2021 when hiring for a new head of public affairs, which shows that Water UK's true role is to shape contributions to public policy and legislative debates, build collaborative relationships with regulators and politicians, develop and maintain good working relationships with key ministers, MPs and their offices, lead on relationship management with parliamentary groups, influencing their programme and content, and managing issues which challenge the water industry's reputation. Further down, one of the essential skills for the job is listed as demonstrable experience of political influence or running a national lobbying campaign. There it is in writing, an admission in the company's own words. This company, which has a board member from each of the 9 main private water and sewage companies, are looking for political influence and assistance running a national lobbying campaign. Now let's look at how government ministers have helped these water companies over the years. A dossier leaked in 1994 exposed large amounts of money moving from the water companies to the Conservative Party. Thames Water donated £50,000 in 1992, and 11 other water company directors were caught donating hundreds of thousands of pounds through different companies they were also directors of. It shows that these companies will try their very best to hide their financial links with politicians. It wasn't just one director, but 11, showing a clear pattern of water companies using other companies they're also directors of to give money to the Conservative Party, in a clear attempt to deceive the public and hide the flow of money. So are MPs encouraging the water companies to hide their donations in this fashion, or are the water companies doing it off their own volition, coincidentally 11 directors at a time? It's clearly in both parties' interest to keep this information from the public. Even more so today, where the scandalous extent of pollution has been exposed while they rake in billions of pounds in profits that should be going to treating the sewage and fulfilling their environmental duties. In 2009, the EU Commission took the UK government to the European Court of Justice for allowing thousands of tons of raw sewage to be poured into the Thames in a breach of a 1991 Urban Wastewater Directive that requires treatment of sewage before discharge. But Brexit saved the water companies from flushing their dreams of polluting our waterways. No need for pesky EU regulations now. As Environment Secretary, Liz Truss oversaw £235 million in cuts to environmental funding. That included a £24 million cut to the monitoring services ensuring water companies don't dump more sewage. Raw sewage dumps have doubled since these cuts. As a result, the Environment Agency has found that 90% of sewage monitors at seasides are broken. In many locations, they aren't installed at all. Over summer 2022, dozens of beaches were closed to swimmers due to high levels of toxic waste, and there were many more that went untested. In 2017, Michael Gove wrote to the chairman of Ofwat, expressing concern about the behaviour of water companies, their opaque financial structures based in tax havens, and excessive profits and high gearing. High gearing is when a company's finance comes from debt rather than equity, meaning these companies are taking on huge debt to finance operations in order to extract the maximum profit in dividends. The problem with this is if at some point in the future these companies are to be renationalised, the taxpayer would have to take on this debt after already having taken on £5 billion worth of debt when we privatised them. All whilst the billions of pounds of profits made by these companies will have been whisked off into offshore pockets. If they're renationalised, they'll be bought for full price, whereas they were originally sold at a 78% discount. Yet, surprise, surprise, nothing changed from this letter. In October 2021, an amendment to the Environment Bill was proposed that would have stopped private companies from dumping raw sewage into UK's waterways. But guess what? The government voted against it. You might recognise some of these guys, but I'll get to them shortly. Incredibly, less than 12 hours after the vote, Southern Water were dumping sewage at 60 different locations along the south coast of England. A mere 104 days after they were fined £90 million for illegally dumping sewage into protected seas for financial gain. Southern Water has a history of criminal activity with 168 previous offences, but it still hasn't altered its behaviour. It's clearly cheaper to break the law and get away with paying a minor fine than it is to upgrade and maintain the infrastructure required to treat raw sewage. The maximum fine for illegally dumping raw sewage into rivers and seas was £250,000. In October 2022, the government promised to increase this 1,000-fold to £250 million to combat illegal sewage dumping. However, Environment Secretary Therese Coffey is reportedly backing down on this. No, we couldn't possibly do anything that might actually hurt these companies' profit margins. If that wasn't bad enough, the UK government also agreed to take 30,000 tonnes of human sewage from the Netherlands to be used on UK farmlands as fertiliser, which is illegal to do in Europe as it inevitably drains into rivers and waterways, causing huge human health and environmental risks. But if you read the Environment Agency's strategy for safe and sustainable sludge use, it's clearly allowed in the UK post-Brexit, but they told us Brexit was about not having to take shit from Europe. In July 2022, the Environment Agency published an environmental performance report for the year of 2021, highlighting the atrocious performance of water companies. So everything coming out in the last few days isn't news. The government have known all about the dangerous amounts of sewage being pumped into our rivers for years. Yet despite this, in January 2023, 292 Conservative MPs voted to allow raw sewage dumping by water companies in our rivers and coasts for the next 15 years. You'll probably recognise a lot of these names. We've got Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who recently said he wants to see firms that pollute UK waterways and seas held to account. Well, obviously not, or he would have voted against this. You may remember Anthony Magnol, the Conservative MP for Totnes, whose campaign received a £5,000 donation from Alex Darwell, the man who removed the right to wild camp in Dartmoor, in the process siphoning taxpayer cash into his pocket. Surprise, surprise, Jacob Rees-Mogg is part of this motley crew. Ex-Prime Minister Theresa May is also up for taking a dump in our rivers. Suella Braverman wants to stop the boaters but not the floaters. Dominic Raab is a bully for turds in our rivers, as is Jeremy Hunt. And we didn't really need any more evidence of Matt Hancock's utter contempt for the public, but guess what? He voted for it too. And there are many more. 292 out of 257 Conservative MPs voted for this. Feel free to pause the video and see if your local MP is on the list. Now, why wouldn't the government, or the members of parliament that comprise a government, want water companies to have a legal obligation not to pollute our rivers and seas with sewage? Why wouldn't they vote to protect our rivers, ecosystems and public health in favour of allowing shareholder interests to ravage our country? Well, shareholder interests is key, my friends. Since the pollution scandal hit the news, it's been announced that water bills will go up in order to prevent sewage spills. No, the water companies couldn't possibly pay for it out of their £18 billion in profit. So the public are now having to front the bill for the infrastructure the water companies were supposed to build to treat sewage, which was the whole premise of privatising them in the first place. So it appears our water bills will go up to tackle this pollution crisis, whilst these private companies continue to extract billions of pounds in profits to offshore accounts. This disaster is a prime argument for the abolition of lobbying. Large corporations' ability to influence law and government policy by paying governments and members of parliament inevitably leads to the corruption and perversion of democracy. Doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, as long as lobbying's around, it'll corrupt politicians on all sides of the spectrum to act in the interests of their own pocket and that of billion-pound companies, at the expense of the people of this country and its environment.